Welcome to the deep dive. So, today we've got something a little different, actually. It's a stack of excerpts from a novel.
That's right.
But we're going to treat these pages like real source material, almost like case files.
Hi.
Our mission is to really dig in and pull out what this story shows us about, criminal investigations, the justice system.
Suspects, motives.
Exactly, and how these different types of crime, we've got a really chilling serial killer case here, but it's also tangled up with urban gang violence, how they can collide.
Yeah, and this narrative, the way the author sets it up in these sources, it gives us this really rich, structured world to explore how these investigations actually work. We get to look at the tools police use, prosecutors use, maybe delve into some of the psychology, the why behind it all, as described in the book.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The source material throws us into this really shocking discovery near Boston College.
Mhm.
We read about two young victims, Courtney Stedman and Josh Kipping. And right away, the scene it sends this jolt, doesn't it? Connects back to a cold case.
Yeah, 10 years cold. The Prom Night Killer.
The Prom Night Killer. And the sources, they detail these unsettling things at the scene, the victims dressed up, those specific injury patterns. And crucially, they're bound with wire. It's clear this isn't just, random.
No, not at all. And the source material really leans into the importance of that signature, the killer's calling card.
Right.
Those specifics the author gives us, the wire bindings, how they're tied, hands to hips, head secured, the dressing after death, the park location. It's a distinct pattern.
And that immediately brings in Detective Alves and former Detective Mooney, right? Because Mooney worked the originals.
Exactly. Mooney's history with those first cases is key here. This signature is what tells law enforcement they're dealing with the same person, or at least someone mimicking them very closely.
So let's compare. The sources mention the original victims Kelly Adams, Eric Flowers near the Fens, then Daria Marcus, David Riley over by the Riverway. And the similarities, as the book points out, they're pretty stark. Couples, always found in those emerald necklace parks.
Right, that specific park system.
And similar methods, strangulation for the women, contact shots, it looks like, for the men. But the book also shows things changed over that decade. How did the killer's methods evolve, according to the text?
Well, the narrative points out a few things. The staging seems better, maybe more practiced over time.
Okay.
The binding materials are different. Electrical wire, like Romex, is mentioned specifically later on. And then there's these attempts at symbols, like the Taiji symbol, the yin-yang.
What's the thinking there? Why add symbols?
Well, as the sources describe it, Mooney kind of speculates. Maybe the killer got more confident or more fixated on certain elements, the whole prom theme, the
Well, you
parts,
gotta throw them off.
or deliberately trying to mislead. Yeah, that's a possibility raised in the text about the Taiji. And of course, looming over all this is that massive question. Why the 10-year gap? Where was he?
Right, the huge gap. Okay, so while the police are wrestling with this ghost from the past, the sources show us this other very present violence happening, urban gang violence.
Yeah, a parallel narrative thread.
We read about specific killings, George Wheeler, Sean Tinsley, Michael Rogers, and a major headache for the cops, highlighted in the book, is this .40 caliber community gun.
The community gun problem. Yeah.
Why is that such a nightmare for the investigators in the story?
Well, the source material paints a pretty clear picture. It's a classic challenge, right? A single gun gets passed around, used in multiple shootings, maybe by different people.
So you can't easily link the bullet casings from scene A to the guy arrested for crime B.
Exactly. It makes the ballistics work incredibly difficult. And then you add in witnesses who won't talk like Tracy Ward initially in the narrative.
Right.
And just connecting the dots between these different shootings becomes really complex. Sergeant Ray Figgs is shown struggling with this exact issue.
And this is where prosecutor Connie Dargett comes in, as described in the sources. He's shown using the grand jury, that subpoena power, to try and force testimony in these gang cases.
A key tool for prosecutors.
We follow that struggle with Tracy Ward, right? Eventually, Ward identifies Sean Tinsley.
But then
Later, the narrative brings in info from Luther and Zardino, pointing to Michael Rogers as the actual shooter in that Tinsley case.
right, it shows how messy these investigations can be.
So what does this storyline tell us about the justice system, based on the source, its tools, its limits?
I think the author uses it to show both the power, like the grand jury compelling testimony, but also the very real limitations. Witness problems are huge.
Yeah, the intimidation factor.
Definitely. And the difficulty of witness protection, that interaction with Tracy Ward's mother, really highlights that. It also shows that dynamic, sometimes tense, between the prosecutors and the police, and just how hard it is to nail down the truth.
Okay, so here's where the narrative, I think, gets really interesting. It starts weaving these threads together in a way you don't expect.
Yeah, the Prom Night Killer case and the gang violence.
Connie Dargett, the prosecutor focused on gangs, starts getting, well, weirdly interested in the Prom Night Killer case. The sources show him asking questions, trying to get details from Alves and Mooney.
It's portrayed as unusual, right? He's asking for specifics. He even shows up at crime scenes like Peter's Hill, throwing out theories. It seems outside his lane.
Definitely. And at the same time, the sources mention Alves having these nagging doubts about an old closed case, the bloodbath killer.
Right, where Mitch Bewley was convicted. Alves isn't entirely convinced, especially after talking to people like John Bland, as the source notes.
And you start to wonder, how might that connect? Are there more layers here?
It hints at potentially deeper issues, maybe mistakes made that could tie into the current situation.
And then there's Richard Zardino. The sources float him as a potential suspect for the prom night killings.
Yeah, the timing fits, right. The killings stopped when he went to prison for something else and started again after he got out, exonerated.
Plus, the narrative mentions him and Luther working as the mayor's street saviors, this public role, but also that some cops, like Ahern, really distrust them.
Right. Ahern's perspective is pretty clear in the source.
So what does the source want us to make of the Zardino theory?
Well, the author presents it as tempting, mainly because of that timeline. But then the narrative adds layers Zardino's public profile as wrongly convicted, the conflicting views of him within law enforcement.
And doesn't Luther provide some kind of alibi later?
Yeah, the source mentions Luther having these detailed logs that seem to account for Zardino's time, undermining the idea he could have been involved in the recent killings. It shows how an initially plausible theory can fall apart under scrutiny within the story.
Okay, but the real twist, the big reveal in these sources, it circles back to someone else entirely.
Someone hiding in plain sight.
Connie Dargett. The narrative drops these bombshells about his past, his connection to a woman, Natalie Fresco.
His childhood dream girl, as the source puts it.
Yeah, and not just a crush. It describes stalking behavior, and this key detail. She got him fired from a job near Newbury Street.
And Newbury Street is significant because...
Because it's right near the Fens, where the first prom night victims, Adams and Flowers, were found years ago.
Ah, the geographical connection.
Exactly. And the source suggests this rejection, this obsession with Natalie, is the root. He started targeting victims, luring them from those college events where Zardino spoke.
Targeting girls who looked like Natalie.
Yeah. It's portrayed as this deeply personal, twisted motivation stemming from that old wound. The source even mentions a fortune cookie message he kept, something about following the path fate assigned you.
Depart not from the path which fate has you assigned. Yeah, it hints at this warped justification he built for himself. It connects his personal history directly to the methodology of the crimes described.
And then, the basement. What do the sources say they found in Dargett's basement? It's pretty chilling.
Oh, it's deeply disturbing as described.
Yeah.
They find this replica courtroom setup.
A courtroom. Wow.
Yeah. And along with that, photos of the victims, the exact kind of binding wire used in the murders.
The Romex wire.
The Romex wire, yes. And the gun, an altered .22 Beretta.
The gun used on the male victim.
The very one. And the source states clearly the ballistics match confirms it's the same weapon used in the original killings 10 years back.
So, psychologically, what does the source suggest this basement setup means?
The author uses it to imply this profound need Dargett had, maybe to recreate the scenes, keep trophies, act out these dark fantasies.
Or practice.
Or practice, yeah. Dargett himself, in the source material, apparently refers to it as his way of practicing. It's the concrete proof within the narrative that locks him in as the prom night killer.
Which leads to the climax described in the sources, this tense confrontation at White Stadium. Alves corners Dargett.
And Dargett confesses.
He confesses to everything, being the prom night killer and his role in some of the gang hits, using that .40 community gun. He saw himself as a vigilante, a cleaner.
Yeah, that's the term used. His confession, as written in the source, is just chillingly detached. He lays out this whole rationale.
Targeting the couples, targeting the gang members.
This twisted sense of justice, his contempt for the people mourning the gang members, this cold view on life insurance and people moving on. The author really uses this moment to show his warped ideology. Like he believed he was chosen to purify the city, fix fate.
It's incredibly dark. And the final moments described are intense. Dargett tries to kill Alves.
But Sergeant Ray Figgs is there, intervenes, shoots Dargett.
And we also learn Mooney got hurt during the raid on Natalie Fresco's house where they finally tracked Dargett down.
Right. So the source wraps it up, the killer stopped, the evidence lines up the wire, the gun, the photos, the confession.
It all fits.
It all fits. And the author throws in these little aftermath details too, like potentially reopening the investigation into Dargett's father's death.
Oh, right. Connecting back to that story about Connie burning his dad's model ark as a kid.
Exactly. Maybe an early sign of his disturbed psyche. And we also see Luther's reaction, his perspective on Zardino, and his ongoing view about how police priorities differ depending on the victim, showing the story's themes continue even after the killer is caught.
So, quite a journey through these pages. We started with this really eerie, mysterious crime scene, peeled back layers of police work, the justice system, the grim side of gang violence, and landed on a serial killer who was right there inside the system the whole time.
Yeah, this deep dive, using this narrative as our source,
Yeah.
really showed us how these seemingly separate worlds of crime can tangle together. The huge challenges investigators face, how appearances can be just so deceiving, and the frankly terrifying motivations people can construct for themselves. It's all laid out in this fictional account.
And that idea, the sources keep mentioning that Dargett believed he was chosen to do this work.
Yeah.
Just think about that kind of internal justification for doing horrific things.
It's chilling.
And the story shows how hard it was for anyone, even cops working alongside him, prosecutors, to see it. So what does this narrative make you think about? You know, what we might all miss, what could be hiding right there in plain sight?